We have had such an amazing time talking about veterans issues at this convention. I hope you have seen it and absorbed so much of it in honor of VetFran's 30th anniversary. And one thing so many of us on this panel and in this room have said, the conversations that we're starting here are just meant to kickstart a whole lot of important work this week. And there is no group within franchising more than the veteran community, to me, that shows how there are intersections across all three of those stories within franchising. Veteran stories are often minority and diversity stories. They are often, and almost always, community engagement and leadership stories. And that's a big part of what we're talking about here today. Our goal with this particular panel and how we see a particular future moving forward in support of veterans and military-connected families in franchising is to work with partners. We all want to amplify our reach, to reach out to others. A big thank you to USAA. USAA made a big investment in us being able to have this conversation. We all know USAA to be a very military-focused organization. It is the heart and soul of who they are as an entity. So it speaks a lot to me. And I am deeply appreciative of their willingness of putting some support behind us to have this conversation while we are here today. Here today representing USAA is Larry Williams. He is the Vice President of Small Commercial Leaders at USAA. So Larry, I'd like to invite you up so you can help us kickstart this panel and tell us a little bit about things going on at USAA. Could you all please join me in thanking USAA?
Thanks, Ricky. That was a kind introduction, and really thank you for this opportunity to be representing not only USAA, but to really be bringing to you an important conversation about the organizations that are represented here on this stage, the impactful work that they're doing in the military community and the veteran community and veteran families, but then most importantly, driving business results for our military community and the veterans and their families. It's an honor to be here representing USAA in a new practice for us, our small business insurance practice, where USAA is leaning into the same ways that we're helping our members through their personal lines products, their banking products, their life insurance products, but really tackling a new area and opportunity for us in how we can support the veteran small business owned community, and even more important, the spouse business owned community. I'm also honored to be in the room with incredible people, franchise owners who are truly making a difference in their community. And I'll just ask a moment for those that served our country to please stand up so we can thank you for your service, if you wouldn't mind. Really appreciate it. USAA is proud to support the military and veteran-connected families through every stage of their life, whether it's during their service, joining the private sector, or starting a small business after their service, or it's a spouse starting a small business while their other spouse is currently serving. This year, we celebrate our 100-year anniversary, and many of you may be aware USAA was founded by a group of 25 Army officers that came together with a promise to insure one another when no other insurance company would insure them, because they were being deemed too risky to get insurance. This is a belief, and when we started this company, was a belief that military members were dedicated to this country, and they needed to be able to have the right products to be financially secure, and that's what our nation's veterans and military spouses do. This is about protecting the American dream for those that protected it for many of us. This is why we chose to be a partner and sponsor this panel, and we're excited to be partnering with the IFA Foundation and VetFran in particular. I can think of no other population more suited to run a small business and serve in our communities than our nation's veterans. I want to thank you once again for giving USAA this meaningful opportunity to support the franchise community and really to support and have impact on those who served our nation. Joined with me today, we have an incredible group of panelists that every single day are making a difference in their communities and the veteran community. Ralph Yaruso, Vice President of Development at Brand One, also the incoming chair of VetFran, Air Force veteran, franchisee, and franchisor. So thank you, Ralph, for being a part of this today. We're also joined by Kathy Roth-Duquet, co-founder, CEO, and board president of Blue Star Family, Marine Corps spouse. So thank you, Kathy. We've got Dr. Mike Haney, Barnes Professor of Entrepreneurship at Syracuse University, and is the Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation. He's also the founder and executive director of the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, also known as IVMF, and an Air Force veteran. So thank you, Dr. Haney. Next is Eric Eversole, Hiring Our Heroes President, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and a Navy veteran. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your service. And last but not least, Art Delacruz, CEO of Team Rubicon and Navy veteran. Thank you, Art. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage and thanking them for their service in the military and their continued service to the men and women in uniform. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for attending. I know it's some of us had a late night last night. I did not. I took it easy, pretty easy, but I'm excited to be here, and it's certainly my honor to serve with my fellow patriots up here. I just want to take a moment to thank USAA and Mr. Williams for your generosity and participation at this year's event. And also special thanks to the IFA and Ricky Amos for your unwavering commitment to the VetFran program. I would be remiss without thanking the VetFran committee members that are here in attendance for the past 30 years since its inception, and especially all of those who have served in the armed forces. And lastly, special shout out to my mentor and immediate past chair, Steve White, who's in the back of the room here, who has just had unwavering and tireless effort to lead us through the pandemic and keep the VetFran committee active and ongoing. So if you could just join me and thank Steve. This panel was organized through the efforts of Paul Cucinato and Kevin Schmigel. These guys are unbelievable how they have worked so diligently to put this together and join this and have us collaborate as a unit. And it's been my honor to work with these guys, and thank you so much for everything that you've done to bring this to fruition. So today we're going to try and address 4 different themes as we go through the session. And the 4 themes that I would like to discuss, with these nonprofits, they represent over 2 million veterans and military families in the communities nationwide. It's my honor to have all these patriots with me today. But the first theme I'd like to address is building bridges with military veteran connected communities, good for your community and good for your business. The second one, discussing how franchise organizations can partner with local and national nonprofits to support causes important to military veterans and simultaneously driving positive business results and opportunities. Partnering with chapter-based military nonprofits, helping veterans and military families make connections in communities where they live and work, and effective partnerships with best-in-class, nationally recognized nonprofits, which will result in opportunities for veterans and franchising as well, growing a large, loyal customer base with millions of Americans who will ultimately drive business. So I'm going to start off with Dr. Haney. Let's start off with you. And if you could, please take a moment to tell us of your work at Syracuse, your passion there, and please set the scene for why veterans are entrepreneurs, why they own local businesses and franchises at a significantly higher rate than their civilian counterparts, and why they are so successful in doing so in your context of your tireless work the past dozen or so years at Syracuse.
Okay, there were a lot of questions in there, so I'm going to start with the one that's freshest in my mind and work backwards, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's important for folks to understand, the role that veteran business owners have played really fueling the engine of the American economy over the past 70 years is in my estimation, one of the great untold American stories. If you go all the way back to World War II, veterans have been, and I'll use an academic-y term, over-indexed to business ownership in this country consistently. The U.S. government did a study in the 1950s looking at the returning World War II generation, 12.5 million veterans that came home after World War II, and what they found is within 7 years of the end of the war, 72% of those 12.5 million either launched a small business or were employed by another veteran-owned small business, 72%. And if you fast forward to today, and pretty consistently over the last 80 years, veterans maybe represent 5-6% of the U.S. population, but consistently they've represented anywhere from 13 to 18% of all small business owners in the United States. And I think it is not so intuitive, but it is fact that military service uniquely prepares someone to go out and run a small business. There's a classic definition of entrepreneurship, an academic definition of entrepreneurship, that says that entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity in the face of inherently constrained resources. And anybody that served, if you take that definition and sort of reflect on your military service, that's sort of what you did in the military. And I think, when you then apply that in a business ownership context, you understand why not only those who have served are drawn to business ownership, but also why they're successful at higher rates than those who have not served. For me, as mentioned, I was an Air Force veteran. I had the good fortune that somebody at the Air Force Personnel Center thought it would be a good idea if maybe I go teach at the Air Force Academy for a little while. So I did that as an active duty officer. I fell in love with teaching and decided to get out and continue that at a civilian university. But shortly after I arrived at Syracuse as a new assistant professor of entrepreneurship, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, getting out of the military. I don't want to get into all the details there, but I now found myself a veteran and an entrepreneurship professor looking for something meaningful. So I launched a small program at my university to bring traumatically wounded service members to the university over the summer to put them through a program to help them launch and grow a small business. A program that at the time, so this is 2007, we called the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. All of that is only context to say, fast forward and 10 years later, and having created then an institute at Syracuse focused on veterans and their families and their social economic wellness concerns, we've put about 78,000 veterans through business ownership training over the past 10 years. Thank you, Kevin. But the point is not to give myself a public pat on the back, but to say the stories are remarkable. What these folks have accomplished is beyond. It's the kind of thing where I can tell you the stories and you will think that I'm making this up. We launched, and I'll shut up here in a second, but a few years back we decided we needed a way to publicize. I described this community as one of the great untold stories. Part of the reason it's untold is there's just a humbleness and a going about the work, if you will, in this community. And I acknowledge that, but I also want to get beyond that. I want to tell these stories. So a few years back, we launched the Vet 100 in partnership with Inc., which is an annual listing of the 100 fastest growing veteran-owned businesses in America that gets announced every year along with the Inc. 5000. And if you look at that list, franchise owners are populated across that list of the fastest growing businesses, privately held businesses in America, each and every year. And it's remarkable. So I think what franchising offers, and I'll stop now, what franchising offers is the perfect blend of autonomy and structure, if you think about that. The perfect blend of autonomy and structure that veterans are seeking as they transition out of the military and to a business ownership setting. So I think this is really exciting, this conversation.
Yes, absolutely, and I think you answered every question. So
Okay.
What really piques my interest with these professionals is their passion. They're so passionate about what they do, and that just exemplifies who they are, what they're all about. So I don't know, I'm thrilled to be part of this. So thank you, Dr. Haney. Building on your comments about veterans owning franchises, I want to ask Eric to jump in here, if you don't mind. Please share with us your role at hiring our heroes, perhaps a little bit more about the organization, and expand on the potential in a very tight labor market, and maybe give us a 30,000-foot view of veteran unemployment and how hiring our heroes has been influential in job placement. Too many questions as well?
No, it is. I'm a Navy, JAG, so that's probably more than my fingers than I have.
Stay in the room. Don't run away when you heard he's a lawyer.
So, I try to get all my thoughts together in one and to open it up.
And, it's always impossible to follow Dr. Haney because I always feel like a little bit in the shadow of what you all are accomplishing. But Hiring Our Heroes is a national grassroots organization that was founded by Kevin back in 2011. And I tell people, it was really founded when we were really facing a national crisis in veteran unemployment at the time. We had a lot of young men and women, especially those under the age of 25. They were coming back from combat zones, facing a really rotten job market. In some of those segments, it was nearly 30%, I think, at the time for that population. And from the Chamber's perspective, and what Kevin really created was a rocket ship, was how do we leverage all of our state and local chambers to impact communities very quickly. And early on, it was hiring events. We did nearly 800 hiring events in the first 3 years of our existence. We were in every big and small community throughout America. And I tell people at the time, we were doing all the right things at the time, but we were doing triage. I mean, we were literally trying to connect unemployed veterans and their family members with businesses that would hire them. Fast forward where we are now, and as you pointed out, we are not in a employment crisis. We're probably in an employer crisis from a workforce development perspective. I've told people there are two numbers factual data points I really think about right now. 11 million, which is essentially the number of open jobs in this country, and 6.5 million, which is the number of unemployed people in this country. Those are not good numbers for most employers. And it's creating a super competitive job market for companies of all sizes to find right talent and to grow and to meet their demands. It's not a bad thing. It's just how the markets come and go. But it does, from an organizational perspective, it does guide us in how we're trying to assist the business community in finding talent. And the first thing that I would tell everybody in this room, and it's to your point about we're not necessarily good at telling our stories. Companies aren't always the best at telling their stories either. But the one thing you have to do for every veteran and really every person you're trying to recruit is tell your story. Why does your business matter? Why does what you do in your communities matter? What differences are you making? That's not only a military thing, I think it's a generational thing. People want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And so tell your story, because here's what I learned, I don't know about you, but what I learned is if you're not going to tell your story, somebody else will, and you may not like it. It's just a fact. Well, how many not so good organizations existed that were just telling stories? And so you have to tell your story. It's a whole different panel. But you have to tell your stories. And really, after that, for a lot of these service members, think about who they are and where they come from. A lot of them are coming from rural America. They're coming from blue-collar backgrounds. They're coming from all segments of the broader population. But they probably don't come from a family that owned a franchise. They just probably don't. So how do you help create clarity, a pathway for them so that they understand, where's the starting point? How do I navigate the process? How do I get the right training with organizations like IVMF? How do I create the right structure? What does this mean near term and long term for my family? If you can create that clarity, a pathway, and tell your story, you're going to be immensely successful. If you don't, it's going to continue. I'm going to just a news flash here. If you think the labor market's tight right now, we got a couple of things coming that's going to make it even worse. There's a demographic cliff that's coming in about 3 years. That's about 300,000 people fewer coming in that are going to be turning 18. And so it's going to get more challenging from a workforce perspective. But the good news is, if you get after it now, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Programmatically, and I'll be very quick, I'm a recovering lawyer, so this is what happened.
Knock yourself out.
Multiple questions. I think part of, from a programmatic perspective, we look at creating strategic opportunities for companies nationwide, both at a nationwide perspective and a granular perspective. There are now programs that DoD support, like Skill Bridge, which allow us to take active duty service members and place them directly in your company while they're still being paid by the Department of Defense. Ours is a 12-week program. This year we'll put about 2,200 active duty service members through that program. 84% of them will be hired at the end of that 12-week time period. Average salary last year was $106,000. So these are really great programs that the DoD is really willing to invest in. We have, if you need anybody need IT or cyber, talent, a lot of those as well. A lot of companies are investing, like Salesforce. If you need data managers, they'll pay for the training. You just have to hire them. You have to know where they are. And so really excited to be on this panel, because I think all those resources of where they are, really a lot of them exist here on this panel.
So direct question for you, this audience, how do they reach out as war and talent to find these folks and attract them to their businesses, whether it be as a franchisee or an employee?
Leverage organizations like VetFran. Look, there is no way that everybody in this room can go to every event that's out there. We have a lot of events on base, and you can't think about recruiting military talent just about recruiting talent based on your geographic location. Because the reality is service members are stationed, their families are stationed all over the country. And they're going to come back to your community, but how do you reach out to them earlier? And so if you can leverage organizations like VetFran to help tell your story, to help create pipelines, that's certainly one way to do it. We have a database of 200,000 active duty service members in it. Happy to have you have access to it. You should work on your sales pitch before you do that, because there's a lot of people reaching out to them. But think about this much in the same way that people think about college campus recruiting. You don't think about, the only place recruiting Harvard is not just the Boston community, right? Or they're not hitting all these other schools just based on geographic location. So I think part of this is really talking to organizations like Hiring Our Heroes. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure, Kevin will make sure that you have my contact information. We have local resources in almost every community across America. You have local resources in every community across America. And then how do you come together as an industry and as an association to really sell your story together? Because it's like the old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. There's no doubt that when you're talking about recruiting veterans, it's really about coming together as a group to help share that story, create pipelines, and then create opportunities once they get in your local communities.
Thank you. That's terrific. You mentioned families, which is a perfect opportunity to segue over to Kathy. Kathy, please, tell us a little bit more about what your role is as CEO and one of the largest organizations for military families in the country. Tell us about your involvement, your passion towards Blue Star families, and what they face through the lens of not just the individual veteran, but the family unit as well.
Thank you, and I'd love to do that, but I'd love to, if I may, just preface first with how happy I am to be in this room with you people right now. And in many ways, it's because I'm particularly gripped by what's going on in the Ukraine. It's very upsetting to me. I come from a family who were refugees from that part of the world, Jewish refugees in the 20s and 30s. And we were fleeing the kind of repression that we're seeing there. And what we found was refuge in the greatest country in the world, which changed the trajectory of my family forever. A family that for generations, for time untold, had not had the freedom to build the kinds of lives that people want to have. Most of the family that was left behind was killed in the Holocaust. We had one member who survived Auschwitz. He was 16 years old and weighed less than 80 pounds when he was rescued by the U.S. Army. He was taught English by a sergeant from Brooklyn. He, in the refugee camp, joined the Army, and that allowed him to move himself and the bride he met in that refugee camp to America. They trained him in fixing typewriters. He built a small business fixing typewriters. He built an office supply store called Commodore Office Supply. He wanted a military name. He built Commodore computers, which some of you who are old enough might remember as one of the first computers for at home. And that was because this is a great country that gives people opportunities to build a better future for themselves and their families. And it's because of the U.S. military, which rescued him, which trained him, which gave him a path to have the success for himself and his family that changed everything. So I have to tell you, I love my country. I did not come from a military family, but when I married my husband, and I had a fancier job than he did, and I earned twice as much money, but then we were attacked on 9/11. And while I thought we would leave the military, we stayed on another 20 years. He served 30 years in the Marine Corps. And I was proud to do it because I am so proud of what this country does for all of us. But, you know, we in the military, we want to preserve this amazing, unique, one-of-a-kind country. But we also want to preserve it for a purpose. And you all are the purpose. You are the people who create small businesses to allow people to live lives with dignity and freedom, who reap the reward, who don't squander the rewards of freedom. It is possible to take it all for granted and to not make the most of it. But, you know, by building businesses, by helping other people build businesses, by contributing to your communities, by making a more resilient nation, you know, that's Thomas Jefferson's vision for what we could be. And so I think the combination of military serving people, veterans, the small business community, the franchise community, because I agree with what Mike said, that by giving people the autonomy and structure to really be successful, you know, not everyone can be a start from scratch small business person, but it's significantly easier with the mentorship and the support. So I'm grateful to be with you here today in what is a difficult time in the world, but which shows what is possible when we, you know, stand on the side of right. So thank you for having me with you.
Thank you.
And if I could just answer a question about Blue Star families, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the war went on longer than anyone thought. And I was very proud to serve, but it was really hard. I was moving my young children over and over again. We moved 9 times in 16 years. It's more than one move a year, one move every 2 years. And my husband deployed to war 4 times. And I love my husband very much. And it's an all-volunteer force, so we did not have to be in. And when he was overseas, people were trying very hard to kill him. And that's really hard to do. So there we were, far from family and friends, young children trying to adjust. I'm giving up my work over and over again. And I want us to be able to feel the military, but I know that as much as it's an honor and a privilege to serve your country, no one's going to do it if it hurts their family. So we need a way that families can thrive while we serve, because we truly are a unit that does it all together. We truly all serve together. So Blue Star Families exists to make it possible for families to thrive by doing research, understanding what the challenges really are, what the families themselves want, developing programs to address that, partnering with the right people. I partner with all the people on this stage, but we partner with people in the communities too, measuring the outcome and delivering that value back again. And we see from our work that a sense of belonging is what people need in the communities where they live, a welcome, and they need meaningful work. And if people have those 2 things, then their lives will be well. They'll be able to keep serving. The military spouses, they want small businesses. They want to work for themselves. 50% of the people in our network, we have 250,000 families who are members of ours, over 1 million military-connected people who use our programs and research each year. They're interested in this kind of work. And if those spouses are working before their service members transitions, that transition is much easier, much safer. That spouse has an easier time working. My husband started a small business when he retired. He was only able to do that because I was making an income. We couldn't have supported our family unless I was working. So I think the relationship between the franchises and the military-connected community is a very natural one. From our work that we do, and we are the largest organization serving military and veteran families right now. We have chapters around the country and members in every state. They want to be connected to the businesses in their community. If you start that relationship early on, those veterans are going to know you, and they're more likely to come to you because they have that pre-existing relationship, and trust is so important. So Blue Star Families started in 2009, and we are grassroots only. We're a $10 million organization now. We have 13 chapters, but we're growing. We hope to 50 chapters someday. And thanks for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Kathy. I had an epiphany while I'm sitting up here, and we're talking about families, veterans, and their families, and how they can impact franchising, and how it's a family decision, as Kathy mentioned. And I started thinking about all the companies that I've worked for in the past, and franchise agreements typically, and the VetFran discount, for example, is specific to the veteran. Why not make it to the spouse, or maybe extended family as well? So I'll challenge you. I'll challenge all of you right now, since we're in FDD season, to think about that. Maybe it's an opportunity to sell more franchises and be more inclusive of the families that are out there. Dr. Haney, I'd like to ask you, can you share any data on some of the family?
I feel, I turn this off, so. I think Kathy knows this data better than I do, but the military spouses specifically are really, with the exception of a few organizations, Kathy's being, number one among that group, is really a profoundly underserved segment of the military-connected community, and military spouses very specifically. If you look at employment data for military spouses in this country, from a wage perspective, often what the data says is they earn about 25% less than their non-military spouse peers who otherwise have the same education, experience, et cetera. They are underemployed relative to those peers, also at a significantly high rate, because they're, as Kathy is the exemplar of, every 2 years, every 3 years, moving. And, that resume sometimes is really hard to explain to an employer. Often, military spouses don't have a chance to explain the resume because the resume doesn't even generate an interview.
Right.
So it really is, and can't foot stomp enough. Kathy mentioned in her comments briefly the all-volunteer military. That's the other thing that, and I could go on, he said briefly, I could go on. We also, as a country, don't talk enough about the fact that we just spent 20 years in 2 conflicts for the first time in our history with an all-volunteer force shouldering the burden of those conflicts. For a lot, for the young kids on my college campus, they don't know anything but an all-volunteer military. But the volunteer force wasn't created until 1973, and the reality is, if we don't do a better job supporting families in the context of sustaining that all-volunteer military, it won't survive. Because you can't continually ask families to make these kinds of sacrifices and then motivate people that have an opportunity cost to volunteer, meaning that there are other things they could be doing, because recruiting in the military is not just about numbers. It's not just about filling the quota. It's about getting the right people to volunteer for service. And if we can't support families better than we have done over the course of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, bring back the draft, because that's what'll happen.
Eric, do you have anything that you could add data-wise with respect to?
Yeah, it's 34% unemployment for military spouses. I mean, that's what we have tens of thousands of military spouses, over 40,000 in our networks. We're focused mostly on the employment piece of that, but there's not another population in America that is, highly educated, but more underemployed and unemployed than the military spouse population. Could you imagine any other demographic in this country with 34% unemployment and nobody, most people in the country know nothing about it? And this is even when when veteran unemployment is 3.4%, 3.5%, and military spouses face 35% unemployment. It's outrageous, and it's really, to all the things that Dr. Haney was saying. I mean, this is absolutely essential to the all-volunteer force. And from a talent pipeline perspective for you all, it is truly the hidden gem of your workforce. A lot of times military spouses, face and by the way, we should be very clear about this, 92% of military spouses are women. And so this is a gender issue as well. So you mix in the moves, you mix in raising families, and all of a sudden this resume looks so much like Swiss cheese that it is so challenging for military spouses to get their foot in the door. And on top of that, as Kathy mentioned, 9 moves in 14 years. So you take then the moves on top of that. And I'm good friends with a woman who's the CHRO of a big company called Cerner in Kansas City. And she was in Fort Leonard Wood and couldn't even get a job. So obviously a very smart and capable woman who's a CHRO of a major corporation, couldn't get a job at Waffle House because you're going to move.
Yeah.
And then you throw in, so on top of that, I mean, just beyond the anecdotal, you throw on top of that, so from a company perspective, if you're looking for people to understand your brand, and many of you have national footprints, give them a chance. I mean, they're going to crush it. Give them a chance, let them get in the door, and as they grow with your business around the country, they're also at some point most likely going to be a great franchisee at some point down the road, especially when their families get off of active duty service. And so that's that entire package, but it is about thinking about it strategically. And sometimes with some people, it's not necessarily looking at them through the lens of what's the next 6 months look like, right? It's what's the long-term strategic advantage of bringing a military spouse into your workforce. And that's significant, but I think 34% says most of it, which is, it's several 100,000. There will be just, we know from our data, COVID caused a lot of women, more women than men, to leave the workforce permanently. I think Goldman Sachs estimated that it was about 1.8 million that left the workforce permanently. That 1.7 to 1.8 million will be coming back, most of them within the next year. Many of them are military spouses. So from a hiring perspective, what I would tell you, you will see a pretty significant of women returning to the workforce and military spouses returning to the workforce starting this summer into September and October. So from a business planning perspective, it's time to start really getting ready because there will be a significant return to the workforce. If you're thinking about it strategically now, you're going to be out in front of everyone. It's going to give you a better chance of hiring a lot of these returning workers so that you're proactive and not reactive.
I have some data to add. Our annual survey, which we do in conjunction with IVMF, we're very proud to. 42% of the military spouses who had been working at the beginning of the pandemic, 42% lost their jobs, 47% lost hours. So I think that swell is coming. Also, our data shows that military spouses are twice as educated as their civilian counterparts. Over 60% have bachelor's degrees. 4 times as many have graduate degrees. So it's a very highly, it's a very educated, capable force.
Thank you. Thank you for, we had a group phone call a couple of weeks ago, and I was just blown away by all the data. So I'm kind of a data junkie, and when I hear some of this, it's just amazing to me that, first of all, are capturing all the data, but then what the data is telling us. So really, really critical that we continue to study that. Art, I'm going to kind of move over to you. If you could tell us a little bit about the mission of Team Rubicon and relate to any stories that you've heard, veteran franchise owners with Team Rubicon, and talk about the potential and how you're working with VetFran and Franchising Gives Back, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sitting next to a data junkie, Kathy, a professor, and a JAG. Just so everyone knows, I had a 2.6, so I'm not good with data or numbers. But what I am good at is storytelling. So Team Rubicon is a disaster response nonprofit founded in 2010 after the Haiti earthquake with 8 souls that went over there and said we could make a difference using the skills, experience, and leadership they'd learned in the military. And since that time, we've grown to 150,000 volunteers. We're across the country. Last year, we did about 260 operations. The year prior to that, we did 360, and that was in light of the pandemic. One of the things that I think uniquely resonates with franchises and what Dr. Haney had said about autonomy and kind of this structure is we're a national organization that has to act locally. And I always think in terms of kind of my ultimate, analogy for a franchise, which is a volunteer fire department, and they're in counties across the country. They're sourced by local, men and women who join. They're trained to a national standards, but when things happen, they respond locally. So our goal as a national organization is to be able to do that, have a national structure that we talked about, and empower military veterans to mobilize and respond to disasters and humanitarian crises. And I'll give you a few examples. Natural disasters, we're always out there. After the tornadoes in Kentucky, men and women from across the country dropped what they were doing, raised their hands and said, I'm built to serve, I wore the uniform of this country, and I'm going back. Through COVID, we did testing, we did mobilization to help decompress medical facilities that were strained. We did vaccinations, going to rural communities across the country. Sometimes it took 17 volunteer hours to find someone we found through food networks that we knew they were homebound, to get a fire department and a needle and a vaccine, show up their house, vaccinate them. And we did that 1.7 million times, and it was high-hanging fruit. High touch, high labor, and it's because men and women, similar to this model with the franchising, said we can make a difference. And one of the things that we've really learned, and I saw probably 20% of this room stood up as military veterans, is in that transition that we all tackle, and all of these statistics and all of these challenges that are there, is the people in this room have a unique opportunity to change the narrative of what a veteran is. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm hearing now. I had a phone call with the White House where they said, listen, we've got this huge logistics problem and we need truck drivers. Who do you know in the military that used to drive trucks? And I think one of the disservices we do is we often label military veterans with what they used to do, and we try to plug them in. And then oftentimes these men and women don't have a choice. Fortunately, they're able to do that. And I think to build on the theme here, it's not just about where they're from, what they've done, it's about what they want to do next. And the people in this room have a unique opportunity to take those skills, experience, and catalyze that ability for them to transition into their future. How do we find the things that they want to do, the things that are going to allow them to grow and fulfill them and their families, and put them in communities across the country where they can do what every veteran and every franchise owner has a possibility to do, which is to galvanize a community around a brand, an identity, and most importantly, around incredible people. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity for the people in this room to build that next volunteer fire department with us. And I think, to this point about disasters, if we treated everyone the way we treat people after a disaster every day, these communities would come together every day and take care of one another. And I think that's a story that we can, again, continue to lead in this moment. And I'll tell you, to Kathy's piece, last night we sent our first 4 people over to Poland for Ukraine. Again, men and women who raise their hands and say, I want to make a difference. And I think, across these communities, every single franchise owner here, every opportunity you have to employ a veteran, to tell their story, to help not just tell the story, but write their story of success in their future will be an incredible contribution to communities across the country. So I think to this question of how you can help is, franchises, and we've heard this said over and over the course of these last 3 days, the words you often hear are community and local, it's family. Those are the things that in a disaster allow us to respond very quickly. So we leverage that model. Team Rubicon hopes to be a national organization again and an ultimate franchise in our 100-year vision. And I don't say a 100-year vision jokingly. I say it aspirationally, like every veteran seems to do. This, how do you make the impossible possible as you do this? And I applaud everything that you've done in this unique opportunity to move men, women, and families forward in a local and impactful way where they grow and help your community grow.
That's awesome. I caution you. So Air Force guy, 20 years old, and I had to take a test drive to get my military driver's license, and I had to test drive in a 15-passenger van. My military driver's license came back with the qualifications to drive a 57-passenger bus. Oh. So make sure you screen those yeah. Or at least double check the Air Force guys. Kathy, can you share a little bit with the audience here about Welcome Week?
Yeah, Welcome Week is a campaign that Blue Star Families devised to solve this problem, the problem of isolation that military-connected families are feeling in their communities. We asked the question in our survey that we do with IVMF, do you feel a sense of belonging in the communities in which you live? 26% said, no, I don't. The number is higher for military families of color, 46%, nearly half don't feel a sense of belonging in the communities in which they live. And I know you all have a diversity and inclusion effort, and I appreciate that, so that's something to take in mind. We know that the worst things that happen in the military-connected space is suicidal ideation, but we also have anxiety and depression and all the other kinds of things. With the help of USAA, we've been doing a 3-year resiliency study to see what factors affect people's resiliency, their ability to not have those worst feelings. And we see that a sense of belonging is one of the most important things, a sense that their community has cultural competency, knows who they are and what they do. And also the ability for the family to spend time together. So Welcome Week is designed to be an intervention. Every year, think in your head how many military-connected people perhaps move. So that number is 600,000 families, more or less. 600,000 coming into the military, moving from duty station to duty station, or geo-bacheloring because the families can't live together for jobs or schools, or transitioning out into civilian life. So 600,000 families facing potential isolation in every zip code across the country. Welcome Week is a moment of intervention. It's the last week in September for communities to roll out the red carpet, say, we know you're here, welcome to the community, we'd love to meet you and integrate you. And Blue Star Families has ways for school districts, for cities, for companies, for community organizations to be part of that and to help reach those families, help find entry points so we can solve that problem, integrate people quicker, which not only helps those families, it helps your community, makes your community stronger, and it certainly supports the all-volunteer force. So we launched it last year. We thought we were going to pilot in 3 places. It ended up blowing up and going national. We had CNN and Fox News and NBC coming on board. We had proclamations from about 37 different governors and mayors and over 130 partners, nonprofit partners, and just a really fantastic response. And what we saw is that the people who participated in Welcome Week did have a movement and did feel that their communities better understood them. And we know that that's going to have a positive impact on their resilience. So we're excited to launch it again. We think there's great opportunities for us to work with the Franchise Association.
That's fantastic. I sit here and think about national footprints and how many of our franchisors in the room have hundreds of locations, if not thousands of locations. And as families get relocated throughout the United States, try and go with me for a second here, folks. Think about your franchisees. Think about their employees. And we don't usually get down into the weeds like that, but think about it for a moment. And if you can survey those folks and say, especially the ones by military installations, and say, how many veterans are employed there? What's the status with their families? Because when they relocate to another city or another area, metropolitan standard area, you know, there's an opportunity for that employee to get hired at another location of yours to keep that continuity. So it starts with franchisors reaching out to franchisees and surveying them, understanding if they, you know, if they're employing military folks, and, you know, trying to create an opportunity for them when they relocate. So just think about it. You know, I think there's opportunity there as well. I know I want to make sure we have some time for some Q&A at the end here. You know, Art, Kathy, you gave great examples for the opportunities, but we want to highlight with VetFran committee members and for other franchise owners who are in the room today, to taking advantage of IFA Foundation programming. We see this as a panel, a first step, if you will, to organize that. We talked yesterday a little bit about sharing our websites on each other's websites to try and get a broader reach to all of our constituents. So Eric and Dr. Haney, if you don't mind, if you could share, talk about hiring our heroes and IVMF's previous collaborations with IFA and VetFran and any ideas that you might have, and how we can partner that in the future. And Dr. Haney, I'll start with you.
I was going to make Eric go first.
Either way, hey,
well,
however you want to do it.
You know, it's funny. I found Eric. He was sad last night. I found him sitting by himself, eating out of a styrofoam, eating his dinner out of a styrofoam pouch. But you know, I was on my way out, but we stopped and chatted a little bit, and in 20 minutes, you know, we had already thought of 3 new ways that we can begin to work together in the context of what we're talking about here. You know, I think one of the things that, you know, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and you know, one of the things that still strikes me is just how profoundly uninformed folks leaving the military are as consumers of everything that's possible to them, particularly as it relates to, we do a better job, I joke, we do a better job making sure a young soldier leaving the military has all the information they need about, you know, buying a truck than we do about the rest of their life in terms of the professional and educational opportunities. And I think one of the things that will be critical in the context of really enhancing and elevating a lot of the conversations that we're talking about here is back to something that we started with, and that's storytelling. But I mean storytelling from the perspective of how is it that we are able to work together and with IFA and other organizations to make transitioning service members aware of this pathway and of the opportunity that franchising specifically represents for them in the context of a transition. I don't think we've done enough in that regard to make informed consumers of this opportunity as folks are transitioning out of the military, because we know, all of us know well, that period of transition is critical. You don't, if you look at some of the less, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, sometimes I describe it as the veteran wheel of horrors. You have all of these very unfortunate data points that are often ascribed to this community. And those data points I say ascribed, they're real. Veterans are over-indexed to suicide, to suicidal ideations. Military families are over-indexed to financial insecurity, food insecurity, a whole host of other things. All of that, though, can get traced back to, at least in part, the transition from military to civilian life. The extent to which that transition happens in a way where there's a plan, there's supportive services and resources, et cetera, directly correlates to the likelihood that that family, that veteran, will experience some of the things on that wheel. And you know, that all goes back to, you know, this idea of informing them of the universe of what's possible. We joke about, and we joked on the pre-call about, listen, I've been hearing about truck drivers and truck driving for 15 years, right? But the reality is not everybody that leaves the military, even if they drove a truck in the military, wants to drive a truck for the rest of their life. And nothing against truck drivers, by the way. It has nothing to do with that. It's what we should be doing is making clear to someone who's leaving the military that anything and everything is possible for them, and there's a pathway to get there. And that really is the hard work. It's not program. It's just making informed consumers of the people getting out of the military.
Yeah, Art.
Yeah, if I could. And one of the powerful conversations I found myself having with a lot of people, in particular veterans, is you almost have to speak to them in this transition, Dr. Haney's talking about, and tell them about the school they graduated from. I mean, the Marine Corps or the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, if you can disaggregate that experience over 4 or 6 or 20 years and say, these are the courses that you've been through, these are the skills you have, these are the experiences that you can leverage, you're no longer you're an infantryman or woman, you're a pilot or a tanker or a logistician. You're saying you've got this wealth of experience, and I look at not your resume, but the coursework that you've done, and then you begin to open up all these worlds of possibility for them because they can begin to connect these dots. And again, this incredible opportunity franchises have to take, with this unique understanding of all the magical ingredients a man or woman can bring and combine them to do these things you want to do is absolutely, I think, an imperative right now, because again, you deliver hope to that man or woman that is going, what do I do next? When you have a conversation, when they walk into your store and you say, thank you for your service, what's next? All these minor touch points become, magical catalysts for their future. So again, I thank you in advance for the incredible things you'll do for all these transitioning men, women, spouses, and families as they do this across the country.
Eric, you care to expand on that?
Yeah,
If you don't mind, if you could just maybe include a little bit about some of the diversity stuff.
let me just say, I'm going to start out with creating pathways for service members and their families into your businesses is a team sport. It is absolutely a team sport. It's not an individual, one franchise or one company, or, it's a team sport. And it's a team sport from an organizational perspective. There are things that I do that IBM, or I don't do that IBMF does, or things Kathy does, arts work, creating community. It's a team sport, and you have to look at it as a team sport. The other aspect, so when you think about how you leverage IFA and VetFran to really do this, it's about how do you create the narrative so you're starting to talk about from a macro level, what does a world of franchising look like for these service members? How do you get to them earlier in the process? How do you create partnerships to start talking about, and again, getting back to my initial point, telling your story. Why is the world of franchising such a great economic opportunity? You have to start early. The other thing that you can do at a very, very tactical level, but it's absolutely critical, and I think it's critical for not only service members, but really when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, assign someone in your company who can be a mentor in the first point of contact as they start to do the transition. I can tell you right now, back to the truck driving experience, because we have a little bit of experience there. What we found was, we worked with an organization that aggregates truck drivers, and I think it's true for a lot of companies. Every 24 hours that pass after somebody's applied and shown interest in what you all do, every 24 hours, it becomes about 50% less likely that they'll actually come on board. And so if you're putting them in a queue where they're waiting 48 hours, or 96 hours, or 2 weeks, or 2 months, you're not going to have a good response. Or if you send them off into the netherworld and they talk to some person who's just answering a call center job and doesn't have anything that can help answer or help them feel comfortable with making the decision, your results are not going to be good. So find someone in your organization or your organizations that can be the initial entry point, their buddy, their mentor, to say, look, let me tell you, I understand you're scared. I understand that money's tight right now. I understand you were in the infantry and you're not sure that, being a business owner is the right thing. Let me tell you how I walk through it, because the one thing that's true in the military, and I think this is true for a lot of underserved communities as well, it's a function of trust and believing that you can do it when you don't necessarily have a lens where you have a lot of people have been down this path before. So, team sport, find a mentor that can help answer these initial calls, and then create very clear pathways along the process. If you're asking someone to come in, what does that pathway and opportunity look like? What are your expectations in 6 months? What do they look like in a year? What types of trainings and opportunities are you going to provide? How easy can you make it for them? Again, that hyper-competitive market. And what resources are going to be out there that ultimately are going to make them successful? Because at the end of the day, you all know that their success is your success. And so if you're just telling them to figure it out on their own, it's probably not the right pathway.
Can I just add one quick thing to something? And he knows this, so it's not a correction, but he mentioned, could be. He mentioned when he was talking about telling your story, why is it a good economic opportunity? Don't stop there. Because the other thing we know from research is that's not the number one driver of post-service choices. Veterans, talk about what it means for family. Talk about what it means for community. Talk about what it means for the opportunity to serve and serve others. Tell the whole story, not just the financial or the economic story.
It's not a correction. That's just an addition.
Yeah, there you go.
That's why I told them they have to figure out their own story. I'm not here to tell
The
them
lawyer.
It wouldn't be an IFA function without a lawyer on the panel.
Yeah.
So we're going to open it up to questions here in just a moment. Jimmy, I'm going to tee you up as the number 2 person. I hate to put you on the spot. He doesn't know this is coming, but I want to share some information about VetFran.org. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the data that we've got there, how many hits we're getting, and all of that good stuff. But folks, for those of you that haven't visited VetFran.org, please do so. My plan is to work with Eric Johnson. I don't know, where did Eric go? Is he still? Oh, there he is, right in front. Sorry. Eric is our new designated, our new appointed manager for VetFran at the IFA. So it's wonderful to have not only a dedicated person to this as a resource, but also a Marine veteran as well. So he's just a terrific addition to the team. But visit VetFran.org, click on 4 companies, understand the differences between the 1, 3, and 5-star levels of participation, and get more involved with that. And my intention is to continue to work with Eric and get all of these folks' nonprofit organizations' websites on there as well, so we can visit them. 2 million plus people they have a vision with. So by sharing our collective websites, we hope to have a much better reach. So again, sorry to put you on the spot, Jimmy, but if you could just share a little bit about VetFran.org and kind of educate the folks here in the audience.
So the VetFran.org website gets about 2,000 to 3,000 visits every month, and the mission of the website is to connect veterans with VetFran companies that favor hiring veterans. And of the between 3,000 average over the year, about 3,000 visits a month, about half of the visits come from organic searches. So it's people looking for an opportunity. About 25% of every visitor that comes there goes to one of the brands. So 570 brands that are in VetFran, and they go right to their recruitment website to look for an opportunity. One of the interesting things about it is, on average, website visits, on average, about 25% of every person that comes to a website ends up on a site. Oh, sorry, I said that. On average, they visit about 4 to 6 pages, and they're on the website for between 5 and 7 minutes. And anybody here that has a recruitment website that's attracting people to their brand, they're lucky if they get 2 or 3 minutes. So they're a very engaged audience, and we're getting some more support with Eric here to expand the website and have more information, and I think being able to connect some of the other opportunities there where military spouse can come to the website and have opportunities to springboard all that great content, and all those people that are actively searching for opportunities to get out to those other sites is really important.
Thank you, Jimmy. Right? Jimmy's also an Air Force vet. Thanks, Jimmy, for that. I appreciate that.
So you guys are amazing at what you do and super inspirational, and Kathy in particular. You inspired me to think differently about some positions that we have at our company and how it can speak to some of the spouses and maybe have a flex schedule, do some things that'll help them. Activation, like everybody in this room wants to go and do something now, right? You guys have inspired us. What would we be able to do tomorrow or today, waiting on our flight, to reach out, change some of our language in our ads, post jobs? Like what can everybody in this room do to help you?
Yeah. Well, I think some things you could do is to always call out the military spouse. This is for veteran and military spouses. We're looking for both of you. Often the military spouse is the person who's going to give information to the veteran. They're the ombudsman in the home. So you're not actually talking directly to a veteran almost ever. You're talking to this, if you get the information to the spouse, it's going to go there. I think the flexible jobs, like you were saying, that makes an enormous difference to military spouses. Putting on your website that we are not only veteran friendly, but military spouse friendly, goes an enormous way. I think the things that we were talking about putting our links on each other's website, we really traffic in trust networks. We find that when someone needs help, no one wants to go to a service provider to get a resource. They want someone they trust to help them. And so we create trust with our community, and then we hand off people to other folks that we trust, the people here who can help them. Well, a lot of these folks have their own trust, but in other places. And so work with those trusted agents to be those messengers so that people come with an openness.
And I can follow up on that one quickly too. A couple of things on the military spouse component, and Kathy hit the nail on the head. Your language, making it inclusive, is really important. Watch your imagery as well. I told my team, every photo everybody was putting up 3 years ago was a military spouse in a sundress on the flight line, waiting, for their service member to come home with the dog in a, American flag bandana. You're not going to recruit any military spouses with that. I mean,
you may offend them.
You may offend them, but you have to, and you have to make it very clear. But the other thing is local engagement. We have military spouses on about 20 military installations right now. You have how many locations? And most of your locations, I suspect, are run by military spouses. Kathy has locations. Yeah. It's a local sport too. So reach out and let's how do we connect your local people with our local resources, and we can help with the language as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a civilian employee of Team Rubicon, but before that, I worked as a compliance employee with a large franchisor in Chicago. The Joint Chiropractic had 13 stores across the Chicago metro. I'm a chiropractor, and my job was to try and get 20 doctors to see, communicate with, and treat their patients the same way. So if you think that it's hard to get unskilled labor to produce food consistently, try and get 20 doctors to do things the same way and come talk to me, see how you do. But I then became a volunteer with Team Rubicon, and a lot of what I've learned working for and with veterans would have made my job with the Joint much, much easier. And it has a lot to do with the way that military culture provides, especially with Team Rubicon, the balance of autonomy and structure that has been a theme of the discussion so far today. And my question to the panel would be, Team Rubicon has 7 cultural principles that guide us in our absence of orders. And it really, some of them have cuss words in them, but we quote them to each other all day, even when we're having crunchy discussions about KPIs and really detailed business meetings that might make us go blind or want to stab ourselves in the head. But how can we leverage the culture that military leadership brings to an organization like Team Rubicon and bring that to franchise businesses across the country that will then really empower civilian middle managers like me to grow our businesses more effectively, because that would have been huge for us.
I'll jump in first and then turn it over to the panel, but I think that in franchising it's pretty diverse as far as the franchisees are concerned, and I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for them to incorporate their own core values and the veteran programs that they offer to franchisees. But more importantly, equally as important, I should say, is expanding those core values and their benefits for their veteran program to their vendors. So, for example, I worked from my previous position was with I was chief operating officer, chief development officer with a Quick Lube company. And I reached out to the likes of Chevron and ExxonMobil, who were very, very supportive and willing to move forward with, supporting that mission for veterans and incorporating that into our culture. So, when you can reach out to everyone you touch in business, it's a 360-degree relationship business, right? Everybody you do business with, you do business with, and you need to have those relationships with. So I think that incorporating that into our culture and trying to, make it an easier path for veterans to become franchisees was instrumental in growing our business and trying to maintain that value. Anyone else care to expand on that at all? Or?
One thing I heard in the question was what military principles help in business.
Sure.
And one thing that I'll say, not having served, but I was very close to my husband, and I learned a lot from him. How many know about the concept of the OODA loop? Anyone? Yeah, right. So that's a fighter pilot concept. You observe, orient, decide, and act. You're up you observe where are the clouds, where's the horizon. You orient yourself in respect to all of those things, with respect to the other plane, the enemy. You decide what you're going to do, and then you act. And as soon as you have acted, everything's changed. You have to start observing, orienting, deciding, and acting again, the OODA loop. And that's how I grew my organization, which really went from 6 volunteers, $0, no famous people, no rich people, no powerful people. We grew 20% year over year until now we're the largest organization. We call it listen, share, partner, and act, and then repeat. That's our OODA loop. But I think coming up with that responsive thing that helps you be successful in a dynamic environment, that's something I learned from a military principle.
And I will just say quickly, there's a balance here too. And you want to create a culture from a broader workforce perspective that's inclusive for all populations. And so there are aspects and attributes of the military culture that are fantastic for businesses. There are also some aspects of military culture that sometimes go a little bit too far. And you, especially in a workforce that's not necessarily accustomed, or a lot of people with a lot of military backgrounds. So there's a balance of how do you appreciate and respect the good things that diverse cultures bring to your workforce, and then elevate and prop those up so that everybody is better. So I do think that you have to be careful, because I've brought great people in who are special forces, top of their class, everything, who come in and don't work out so well, quite candidly, because they're not managing a battalion of Rangers anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And that's probably, does anybody have a battalion of Rangers that they're managing? And as you know, like, people management is probably one of the most difficult things all of us in this room do each and every day. Yeah. And so there's a balance, and you have to set those expectations with service members when you bring them in, because if you don't, you're going to have a significant misalignment of what you're trying to accomplish, and they're going to drive as hard as they possibly can, which can be good sometimes, but can be really bad when you need somebody to pump the brakes.
I'm looking at my friend Kevin and Paul out there. So I will say I smiled when Eric was talking, because I've seen this over and over and over again. Marines, young enlisted Marines. I mentioned I've been training veterans in business ownership for 15 years. Some of the most blow your mind examples of folks launching and growing successful businesses that had really no business being this successful, are young enlisted Marines. And I'm convinced it's because, back to that definition I shared about, entrepreneurship, business ownership, about the pursuit of opportunity in the face of inherently constrained resources. There's no military experience more aligned with training you how to do that than being an enlisted Marine. But to Eric's point, sometimes I remember one young man who today is very, very successful with a property management business, and but he would have his non-military employees, everybody that out doing PT in the mornings, and it just went too far. I mean, it just, and he couldn't keep his employees very long. But that's, so there are examples like that.